Hi everybody! In this video demonstration I'm going to be walking you through how to prepare your tiles and how to bevel the edges. The two tiles that you see in front of me are going to be the tiles that I'm going to use to show you this demonstration. The tile on the left is at a leather hard stage, so this means that this tile is ready to be beveled and prepped. You want your tiles to be at this stage when you bevel and also when you connect. The tile to the right is a little bit softer, so it needs to sit for a little bit longer before I can bevel the edges really well or before I can connect it to the other tile. I can still prep it at this stage, but as you can see it's starting to bend and curve, and that's not what you want when you are building, or else all of your tiles will bend and curve. But you can square up the edges if they are starting to bend, just like I did when I took the tile and placed it onto the table. Now I'm going to make sure that all of my tiles are actually the correct size. As you can see, this tile is actually a little bit short. If you have a tile that is a little bit short, you're going to want to set it to the side and rethrow your tile. So I have a backup tile right here that I'm going to use, and I'm still going to test it to the template and trim it if it needs to be trimmed. You want to make sure that all of your tiles are the exact same size, length, and height. If you have one tile that is slightly thinner than the rest, you can still use that tile as a lid or a base, but you want to make sure that you have 4 tiles that are all even and concise tiles. So I was able to trim this tile up a little bit, and as you can see it's pencil thickness all the way throughout. I'm going to prep these to get them ready to be beveled. So there's a couple of things that you want to keep in mind when you are prepping your tiles to be worked on. Number 1, you want to make sure that they are all the correct size. Using the ruler and my needle tool, I can trim off any excess clay. Now after I've completed this step, I'm now ready to prepare the surface of my tiles. I'm going to need to use a rib tool. You can see I have a blue rib tool in my hand, and I'm going to want to make sure that I clean the edge. All of these little spots I'm going to fill and smooth. I'm going to take off any excess dry clay. If I keep the excess dry clay on there and try to drag it across the surface, it's going to just continue to mess up the surface of my tile. So I'm taking the side of my rib tool and I'm pressing it up against the edge. What I'm doing here is I'm just squaring up the edge of my tiles and making sure that my edges are nice and clean. And I'm just very lightly pressing it up against the side of the tile. Now as you can see, it's pushing some of the clay back, and what I can do with that is smooth that out. I can use my finger to smooth this, or I can just continue to use the rib tool. But I am going to want to go back and smooth that out. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking the rib tool and I'm just making a couple of passes across the top. Each time I make a pass, I'm going to be pushing the clay around, and I want to make sure that I clean that up. So I square up the edge after I make a couple passes. This guarantees that my tile keeps its shape and that it has a straight edge so that when I bevel, my tile is not thin on one side and thick on the other. I'm going to fill this little dot that I have here, this little line. I'm just going to take a little bit of my excess clay and I'm just going to lightly kind of press that over the space on the tile. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of filling the holes. Think of the pavement on the streets when there's a pothole in the street, and then the workers come and they take some asphalt and they fill in the little hole, and then they have to go back over and they have to smooth it. That's exactly what you're doing to these tiles. You're just finding the holes and filling them with a little bit of excess clay. And then with my rib tool, I'm going to slide it over the top of my tile and smooth it. This is going to guarantee that there's no holes, there's no hills and valleys. My tile is smooth and neat. As I make my passes over my tile, my rib is going to pull up any of the excess clay and smooth it so that it's even. Now I want to continue to clean my rib tool as I make these passes because it's going to gather up excess clay that I want to get rid of. If I continue to keep that on there, just like with the dry clay, it's going to mess up the edge of my tiles and it's going to mess up the surface of my tiles. So with every couple of passes or so, I clean the edge. If you have an edge that's a little bit thinner than one of your other edges, you can also use this technique to kind of fill and even out the edges. Now it doesn't have to be completely perfect because we are going to go back and bevel these edges, but you just want to make sure that you have a smooth, neat tile and that your edges are square. So as you can see, I've filled some of the holes. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. Now I'm just applying light pressure to this, and I'm letting the rib tool do most of the work for me. If I press really hard with my rib tool, what's going to happen is I'm going to create a lot of lines and an uneven surface. So I just want to lightly drag the rib tool across the surface and across the edges. Now, you'll notice that I'm going in kind of a similar direction with this. I want to keep that pretty consistent so that my tile stays nice and neat. Now I'm going to do the same thing to one of my other tiles. And you're going to repeat this step for all of the tiles because you want to make sure that they're all prepped and ready before you bevel. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that you don't want to do to your tiles. When I threw my tiles, I did not pat the surface like this or press my fingertips into the surface of the tile to try and flatten it out. You want to make sure that when you throw your tile, that's how you get your tile flat and even. If I continue to press my fingertips into the surface of the tile, it's just going to continue to be bumpy. It's going to create even more hills and valleys, and I'm going to have to work even harder to smooth out the surface. It can be fixed, but you don't want to spend a lot of your time pressing your hands and your fingers into the tile. You want to make sure that you throw the slab, cut your tile, and that it's even and neat at that stage. And that when you go back with the rib, all you're doing is just filling little tiny holes and not having to fill in the entire tile because you've pressed your fingers into it. Now notice that I'm pulling the rib tool towards the center from the edge. So I'm going from the edge, inward, or I drag it all the way across. I'm not going to move from the center outward because that's going to push the edge of my clay and it's going to create an uneven round edge, and that's not what I want. If I do that, I'm going to have to continue to go back and square up my tile. And this is basically just repeating the work that I've done, and I don't want to do that. So I want to pull it inward or off to one side. But I don't want to pull from the center outward because then I'll get a little bit of clay that hangs onto the edge and can actually affect the bevel. So you're going to spend a little bit of time cleaning these up, making sure that they're nice and neat, that the edges are square, so that they're ready to go, and so that you have nice, clean tiles. If you try to do this afterwards, it's going to be a little bit harder because you're going to be connecting your tiles. You will do a little bit of smoothing and prepping, or not prepping, but you will do a little bit of smoothing and kind of filling when you do connect them, but you want to do a large majority of that prep work prior to connecting your tiles. It just saves a little bit of time and it makes sure that your tiles are all even, that there's no dips, and that they're ready to be connected. So I'm just continuing to check the surface of my tile, check the edges of my tile, add excess clay if I need to, and then smooth with my rib. And after I've done my smoothing, I want to make sure that I square up the edge at the very end. Now I'm going to use this other tile that's a little bit smaller as my test tile because it is at a leather hard stage, and that's the stage you want the tile to be at when you bevel your edges. You want it to be able to stand using just one finger. The other tile that's off to the side is a little bit soft at this point. If I try to bevel it and it's soft, it's going to pull extra clay, and I don't want that. So you do want to make sure that your tile is a little bit firmer so that when you drag the bevel tool across the edge, you don't pull extra clay. So this is my bevel tool. There's two edges. There's a 45 degree and a 65 degree. We're going to be working with the 45 degree angle. Now there's a very thin wire that you're going to have to clean because little bits of clay can get stuck there. You want to be very gentle when you clean out this tool. So sometimes it's helpful if you take your needle tool, make sure your needle tool is clean, and you just poke out the excess clay. Sometimes clay can dry there, and if the clay is there when you try to drag your bevel tool across the edge, what can happen is that you can grab extra bits of clay along the edge and have an uneven edge. So you just want to make sure that you are cleaning that little piece, and you're going to start with the wood edge next to your tile. So don't use the 65, use the 45. I'm going to place the wood edge right up against the corner of my tile. So the wire will be at the top and the wood edge will be right next to the side. Now you want to make sure that you're doing this on a flat surface. I'm going to place the wood edge up against the side and the wire on the top and pull towards myself in one quick motion. I'm going to take the little excess bits of clay and remove those. I'm going to now poke out any excess clay that's stuck there. Don't pull the wire because it's very fragile. You just want to poke the clay out. Now I'm going to turn my tile and repeat the same step. Turn my tile, place the wood along the edge and the wire at the top, and pull towards myself. With each pull, I'm removing the excess clay and setting it off to the side. You will not want to throw away these pieces of clay because you can always reuse them. Now I have a nice beveled edge, and these are the edges that we're going to be connecting using the score and slip method. If you don't prep your tiles prior to beveling, what can happen is you'll have big holes where your tiles are beveled, where the edges are beveled, excuse me, and that allows for air and cracks to happen when you are in the building process. So this is why we prep our tiles ahead of time and fill any holes or dips so that we have a nice clean line. So I'm going to show you with one of my other tiles, my correct size tile, how to bevel the edge. So again, you've seen me do this on a leather hard tile. This tile is a little bit softer, so I'm going to put my thumb at the very edge. When I pull the bevel tool towards me, I'm going to stop right at my thumb. So in case your tiles are a little bit softer, this is a technique you can use. You don't want to pull past your thumb because what can happen is that you can pull some extra clay and lose the shape of your tile. So again, I'm going to get rid of the clay. Very lightly removing that with my needle tool, placing it at the top, putting my thumb at the bottom, and pulling towards myself. I'm going to turn my tile again and repeat the steps. And now I have beveled all 4 sides of my tile. You'll want to do this to all 6 tiles. We will connect the tiles along the beveled edge. So you also want to make sure that you are keeping track of which sides are supposed to face which way. Your beveled edges are always going to face inward. So now I'm going to gather up my excess pieces of clay. I'm not going to get rid of these. I can re-wedge these pieces and I can use them on my design. All I have to do is re-wedge them with my excess clay, kind of gather up the little bits that are on the table, place them back into my Ziploc bag with a spray of water, and now I can reuse this clay. And here are my two completed tiles, both with beveled edges, and I'm going to connect them in my next video demonstration along the beveled edge and add a coil for reinforcement. So as you can see, it creates a nice seam along the edge, and this is why we use the beveled edge to create these sides of our tiles.